Welcome to But Jesus Drank Wine.
And other stories that kept us stuck. I'm Meade.
And I'm Christy.
And in this podcast, we'll explore the stories that kept us, well, stuck, wanting to drink and not wanting to drink all at the same time.
Join us as we show you that freedom from alcohol does not have to mean a life sentence of misery and missing out,
but actually means living an authentic life full of peace, joy, and purpose.
Y'all, we are so excited to share our guest with you today. In the studio is none other than Dr. Curt Thompson. Y'all, before we even hit record, I was crying. Yes, I was crying. Then Christy was crying. We were all crying. What a blessing this time was. We are so grateful for. If you've been listening to our podcast for even a minute, you know the impact his work has had on my life, as I always am referencing his work. And it just was such a gift to have this time that, with him. For those of you who don't know who he is, psychiatrist Curt Thompson, MD, brings together a dialect of interpersonal neurobiology and a Christian anthropology to educate and encourage others as they seek to fulfill their intrinsic desire to feel known, valued, and connected. Curt understands that deep, authentic relationships are essential to experiencing a healthier, more purposeful life. But the only way to realize this is to begin telling our stories more truly. His unique insights about how the brain affects and processes relationships help people discover a fresh perspective and practical applications to foster healthy and vibrant lives, allowing them to get unstuck and move toward the next beautiful thing they're being called to make. Through his workshops, speaking engagements, books, organizational consulting, private clinical practice, and other platforms, Thompson helps people process their longings, grief, identity, purpose, perspective of God, and perspective of humanity, inviting them to engage more authentically with their own stories and their relationships. Only then can they feel truly known and connected and live into the meaningful reality they desire to create. So I heard Curt one time describe sitting in front of this Rothko painting, being in the presence of this beautiful painting and having felt seen by this painting. And I thought that was a little like, okay, that's kind of weird. Like, I don't understand until I really dug into his work. And now I can say the way that I feel after engaging with his work through his books, through his podcast, just being around and about him, it's that same feeling. I get it now. I get it. It's that his work leaves me feeling seen. His work is beautiful and it's such a blessing to me and to so many people. And we're so grateful. And we pray that this conversation blesses you as well. Good morning. Happy Monday.
Hello.
Hi, friends. Oh my gosh, I can't believe that this is actually happening. I wish we should have Clarissa go back and see if there's a way to tally how many times I've referenced something from Dr. Curt Thompson's work. Yes, that's for you, Lauren, who's out there listening right now. Dr. Curt Thompson is here with us today, and it's something that his work has been super impactful, super meaningful to me. And I referenced your work so many times on this podcast. And now I'm just thrilled that our listeners actually get to hear from you so that I don't have to, I just keep butchering what you say and they can actually hear it from you. But for the listeners that haven't really heard kind of what landed me to your work. So welcome, first of all.
Well, first of all, no, me, first of all, me. Oh my gosh. Thank you. I still remember the moment that we first met at that first conference in Northern Virginia. I am thrilled beyond words to be here and am just really grateful and humbled to be invited to come. And so I'm really looking forward to the joy we're going to have at having conversation with each other. This will be fabulous. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah. So back in 2020, I was in coaches training. I just found freedom from alcohol. And so you kind of know, Curt, like what our listeners were in that gray area space of drinking where alcohol is just taking up too much space in their lives. They're not that kind of rock bottom, quote unquote, alcoholic space, but they're exploring what life could look like, without alcohol, or a better relationship with alcohol. And that's what we talk about here. And that with me before I started coaching training back in 2020, where I came across this podcast and I heard you for the first time on talking about the soul of shame.
Mm,
And
mm,
in that coach's training, I was like, ooh, shame, that is something in this freedom from alcohol space. Although it's something that's super big. I'm like, I'm going to be a student and I'm going to learn all about it because I think it's going to be super helpful. Meanwhile, me going like, but it doesn't apply to me personally, right? Like,
mm.
yes, I could be a student of
Yeah.
this and learn about it. But I heard you on this podcast and I was like, yes, but I'm going to go with more scientific shame researcher person because my clients aren't going to be Christian. So I put your work aside, went headfirst into all this other stuff. The long way around this is my pastor came back around a year and a half later and was like, how you've been asking these questions about how science and God connects, but you can't quite figure it out. I heard this podcast of this guy, and I mean, it will be helpful for you as a resource, but also it absolutely undid me.
Mm.
And and then I was like, oh, what was it? That podcast was the same podcast I had heard a year and a half prior.
My goodness.
The soul of shame, you on typology. Anyway, and at the end of that, because you're talking about how Jesus meets us in the pit of our shame, and he
Mm.
says, I see me seeing you in that. And it undid me. And
Mm.
all of that to say that started this next freedom journey
Mm.
for me, that
Mm.
it launched this whole, I was a Christian in name only, or a Christian tourist before, but
Mm. Mm.
I knew it with my head. I believed with my head, but it hadn't been made true in my heart yet and deep in my chest, as you say. So I've read your books. You have 4 books. We're going to talk about the deepest place today, suffering and the formation of hope. But I would love if we could just start kind of in your own words, like what led you to the work that you've done and that has been so meaningful to me, many others too.
Yeah. Well, thanks. First of all, it's really, it's again, I use the word humbling a lot because it's just the way it is, to hear about your journey in more detail. It's, I just want to say we're in the middle of a sacred moment, even as you name those things that have been true for you. Meade, I think, when I am asked this question, I think the first thing I would say is I really do believe that I am the recipient of the love and kindness and wisdom of lots and lots of people. And that began literally in my own home. I grew up in an evangelical Quaker tradition. And and there, this pastor who was in our church, for my developmental years had a great influence on me, even in ways that I would say, I only really came to understand later as in my adult years. You're looking back, you're like, oh my gosh, like I was formed by something that was happening that I was not consciously aware of that was happening. I had this rather significant encounter with Jesus when I was 13. That my then later, many years later, my New Zealander Anglican priest, spiritual director, would say that he thought that I had the baptism of the Holy Spirit, which of course, if you're a Quaker, it's really, we're trying to get our head around what that actually means. And not long after that, immediately found myself, entering into this existential crisis that lasted for probably the better part of 20 years. And it led me in all kinds of directions, but this sense of, probably some combination of my curiosity about why we do what we do as humans, my anxiety about not getting, like, whatever the answer to that question is, I'm not going to get it right. And that's freighted with all kinds of other things. But that eventually leads me, undergrad medical school and the psychiatric residency, which is a whole story in and of itself. But I think I found myself now almost 20 years ago, at the doorstep of encountering this new emerging field of interpersonal neurobiology. And my friend and colleague Dan Siegel, mentor in many ways, I became introduced to this. And in that time, in the last 20 years, there has been a lot of dot connecting, if you will, between what we are learning about what neuroscience teaches us and the biblical narrative of what it means to be human. As we like to say, science tells us about the mechanics of how we operate. It does not tell us why we operate the way we do. It does not tell us about the purpose for our operational, for our, this machine that we call the mind. It doesn't give us the purpose. It doesn't, as Michael Polanyi once famously said, there's no such thing as science. There are only scientists. Science doesn't tell us anything. Only people tell us things, which is important because no human being ever tells anybody anything apart from a set of assumptions that they're already making that they're not even aware that they've made about the story that they're telling, even if they think the story is about, the chemistry experiment that they just told. And so it was first this work of, spiritual formation and neuroscience, which was the work of the first book, which kind of naturally led to, if we were made, if the intention was for us to become these blossoming, integrated beings who, as kings and queens, to rule the earth, that's our job, to create and curate beauty and goodness in the world. That's what it means to be human in this ever expanding life together. Like, why do we not do this very well? Why are we having such a hard time? And this is where, in the work with patients and so forth, you see the role that shame plays, and that shame is trauma's primary instrument. It is its instrument of choice in the way that and we have to remember that shame in and of itself is not bad. It's necessary for human development. There are plenty of behaviors that we commit for which shame is the actual appropriate response that we should have. In fact, there are a lot of things that go on in our world today for which people don't feel ashamed about things that they should. Our problem is how we respond to it when we in the way that we do. And so, I mean, I think since then there has been this humbling, fascinating, exhilarating journey of, as we like to say in our work, that we want people in our practice. We work to help people tell their story more truly. This is what we really do believe that there is a true story with a capital T. And by this, I don't just mean truth as some abstraction or some posited set of beliefs, but like, what does it mean for you to truly live into who you are as a daughter, a sister, a mother, a friend, an entrepreneur, a podcaster, a creator, all these things? What does it mean to live truly without shame dictating the terms, without trauma dictating the terms? What is it? All those kinds of things. And that's a long-winded answer to your question. I think the last part that I would add to it would be, again, I mean, I get home from work every day and I say to my wife, Phyllis, like, I can't believe I saw what I just saw. Because there are so many moments where we watch the Spirit of God do things in people's lives that they would have one day early believed was impossible. But it's not magic. I mean, it involves their cooperation. It involves excruciatingly difficult work on their part when they are doing it in the context of a community of other people who are doing it right alongside with them. We see this beauty emerge, and I feel like I have this unusual privilege of being able to bear witness to it. Yeah, that's a lovely thing. I don't deserve my life, and my work is only one part of why that's true. But so is being on this podcast with you all.
Thank you. Yeah. So good. That has been my experience. You know how you can read something, and I think this is how a lot of people come into this work, like trying to find freedom from alcohol, come into our community and world, and they're like, okay, this is here, probably how patients show up in your, I've heard you say this, how patients show up in your office. It's like, okay, I have this problem. Here's this thing. I need to solve this. I need to fix this. Now give me the roadmap for doing that. And what they're not realizing that there's all this other stuff underneath that. That's just the symptom. And I think for sure that has been not only what I have noticed with the humans that I've gotten to work with in this work, but in my own journey and that real work. I love that you named that it's hard work. This is hard work. All of it. Freedom from alcohol, that is hard work. But the work that comes after that is hard work. And as long as we believe that, I had this belief that you find freedom from alcohol and then just like ride off into the sex ed and all this fine and go back to my, good Christian life and my good Christian behavior that, whatever. what a surprise and what a
Mm.
delight because of how I've been able, you mentioned, through the power of community, being around people who can walk that with us. So,
Yeah.
uh, yeah, what I was thinking is that we can have these experiences where it's like, give me the roadmap, but then also what I've experienced is then reading scripture and going, oh, this is what, so like Romans 5:1-5, that the deepest place is formed around. Like, that is what I've experienced. And so now I'm making sense of something that I've experienced
Sure.
with the words versus going, here's my roadmap and I want to follow this. And so I guess that's a good way of kind of getting into suffering and the power in naming it, and
Hmm.
what this beautiful book invites us
Mm.
into.
Well, we if you just toss out the word suffering, anybody who knows the definition knows what we mean. And they don't just know it because of the definition. They know it because they've suffered, because everybody is going to have that experience in some way, shape, or form. And, we like to say that we suffer for one of three reasons: that we suffer because of things that have happened to us. We suffer because largely we suffer because of things that we do to ourselves that we are also largely unaware that we're doing. And then there is this third form of suffering that comes as a result of our decision to live in the real world, our decision to live truly, our decision to follow the King, our decision to give up our addictions. Our, it's like you think like, well, you know, yeah, to follow Jesus is like one lifelong withdrawal experience. It
Mm.
doesn't mean that that's all that's happening, but like it's happening all the time. There's some part of me that is in withdrawal, right? Because I'm, if I'm going to take that journey seriously, and there is a certain suffering that comes in withdrawal. And the real question then becomes, as believers, as followers of Jesus, how do we imagine? How do we imagine suffering, especially in light of these other things that Paul in Romans chapter 5, the first three verses, like there is this on ramp to suffering that Paul describes, such that if we're going to think about this as Jesus followers, there are other things to include in our awareness, that is to inform us as we suffer, and so allow the suffering to be transformative itself instead of just being this nasty thing that we have to put up with until we're dead.
That's something that the durable hope that you talk about that comes as a result of suffering. I had all these stories about not being allowed to like, my problems aren't real. I
Mm.
don't suffer. I don't have suffering because, I can't. There are people that have it so much worse off, and just being able to reframe suffering in those terms has been the
Mhm.
greatest gift, because it
Mm.
does give this permission to say it's okay. Before we hit record, we were talking, and it's like it's okay to say out loud, even though we know that God has a plan for this, and we can know all of that. It's also okay to be right where we are with, this is really painful,
Right.
and yeah,
Right. Right. Well, the whole notion of our imagining that God has a plan for this, the whole notion of Paul writing, in the end, all things, God's working all things out for the good of those. This is not a guy who's going to be able to write that as a prescriptive kind of text for you to just like, okay, so there's the truth, go believe that and you'll be fine.
yes,
He's only able to write that because at some point he probably has had experiences in which there's all kinds of things that have happened, a lot of which have not been very fun. And in the middle of which one might, I'm sure he's wondering, what the heck? Like I had that whole thing that happened on the Damascus Road, whatever that was, that I'm trying to remember. It was strange at the time, but it's undeniable. But now, now that people are beating me with rods because I'm talking about what happened, this is, you know what I mean, right? So not until we have the experience of recognizing, we can look, we look at our rearview mirror and we see that, things are okay. Can we then actually write that? And so in the same way, I can't imagine that God is going to work this out and work through this if I haven't yet named it, if I haven't yet allowed God to meet me in that place so that he can take me through that place so that I can then come to the conclusion that we're going to be okay. And so I still have to be in the presence of others and in the presence of the Spirit to be able to say, without comparing myself, my lot to somebody else who I think is suffering more than I am, or somebody who's suffering less than I am. Like, God is not going to be asking me questions about other people's lives. He's going to say, what did you do with your life? What did you do with those moments of suffering? Like, what, did you think that was not important for you to tell me that you were upset about your, okay, sorry, I'm going off the grid here. But I mean,
Keep going.
I think this is the thing where, I mean, how many times in these confessional communities do people they want, they flinch. They want to pull their punch. They don't want to name because they can look around the room and look at anybody else's story that's so much worse than theirs. And so instead, what do? They hold it, and they got to burn energy to contain it. And then that night they're going to go home and they're going to drink too much because they have to have extra help to contain what they can't name because it's not that big of a deal, except, that I'm drinking too much. And so your word, Meade, your word is really right on this notion of the significance. Jesus says, look, you don't have because you don't ask. You want my mercy. I'm happy to give you my mercy, but I can't give you my mercy if you don't tell me what it is that you need mercy for. Like every jot and tittle, every little thing. Like I'm really serious. Like I want.
That was the big surprise for me. It was hard enough to name ways in like that first type of suffering that you talk about in the book, where the things that have been done to us or things that should have been done that weren't done that way. It's like, for me, this work has been hard enough to go there, but then to enter into that second part of the ways in which I've, in really horrible ways, tried to contain all of that. People pleasing, perfectionism, chasing popularity, status, all of the things, not to mention the over drinking, the wine use. And so it was a surprise to me that it's hard. It's hard. That wasn't a surprise. Like once I had an idea of what that was, but the fact that we get to be with other people in the room with us who are I love that you say that, like, Jesus we as the body of Jesus is not a metaphor.
Yeah.
I love that you say that because that has, been my experience.
Yeah. In some respects, we hear this about the Gospels, that Jesus, he's talking to hundreds, if not thousands, and this then gets whittled down to smaller groups. And then he, talks to his disciples in the smallest subgroup. And then when you read Leslie Newbigin, who talks about the Gospel of John and how when you start at John 5 and 6, where he feeds 5,000 and people want to make him king, right? And by the time you get to John 10, he's asking the question, do you also want to leave me? To his disciples, because everybody else has left. And Newbigin says, oh gosh, this sentence gives me chills. He says, and so we see that the preaching of the gospel leads not to church growth, but to its opposite. Because this is what Jesus is asking things of people. Love is asking that we eat his flesh and drink his blood, which of course sounds grotesque, because we're not willing to be curious enough to do the hard work of coming and saying, wait. What do you mean? Tell, right? No, it's like, no, I can't do that. So I leave. And this is what I have parts of me that are doing this every day, leaving. The rich young ruler, I just leave. All the things. I just leave. So this notion of coming into a community, a small community of people who are willing to stay in the room, no matter which parts of me, and then they're going to stay in the room and they're going to ask me to bring the parts of me into the room that I hate the most. And some of those parts are so deeply buried, I don't even know that they're there. Sometimes I don't know, we don't know until someone else is talking about their story and they say something that evokes something in me. I don't, and I'm just, really angry about this thing or that thing or whatever. And then somebody says, well, wait, Curt, where's all that coming from? And I'm like, oh, what? all of right. And there, and so suddenly you discover, we thought we were talking about George, and it turns out that the spirit is in the room and on the loose, and revealing parts that need to be healed, parts that need conviction, parts that need to repent. And this is, as you say, like this happens with real embodied people in real time and space.
And that's been hard to allow people into that space, just like it's hard. I could keep God at an arm's distance, for so long. Like, I know, but also like when you're even talking about like asking for mercy, and asking for allowing ourselves to be loved by him. And that's something that has taken being around other people,
Yeah. Yeah.
allowing that to be made more real. That's what your work kind of
Mm,
launched for me and
mm.
allowed me to invite professionals into my world to help me with that.
Yeah.
And through the confessional community that I've, been a part of for over a year now, which has been incredible. We're always like, how is this, like, how does this work? It's just, I mean,
Mm,
it's like it puts oxygen back in the room.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, why is it so hard for us to receive love from God and mercy? And why is it so hard for us to receive love from other people? We're not good at giving it to other people. And we're certainly, yeah, maybe harder
Yeah.
to receive it. Why is that so hard?
Well, I mean, I think I think we come by it honestly. I think, Adam and Eve were naive, right? They were not, I think we can sometimes have this misconception that these were two people who were, uh, fully formed and mature human beings who were well aware of the world and the circumstances in which they occupied and so forth and so on. So it's easy for us to say, well, they knew better when she took the fruit and then all the things. But when we recognize that, in fact, they're actually pretty underdeveloped, then it makes it even easier to want to blame God, because like, how could you leave naive, unsuspecting people out there, like just in the middle of the highway with 18 wheelers coming at them? Like, how could you do that? Like I mean, but here's the thing, like I'm ready to blame God just like Adam was ready to blame God. This is because the story is intended to reveal like who we are. This is who we are. Whether you believe Adam and Eve really existed or didn't or whatever, like there's no question that like I exist in them. Like they are me. I'm more than happy to blame whoever for and tell God all the things. And so I think there is a sense in which part of why it's so hard is that we have an ancient memory. We have not just my own personal ancient memory, but my memory through my parents, my grandparents, all the way back. An ancient memory that carry that is with a lot of inertia attached to it, that has intimacy is entangled with shame. It's just tangled up with it. And so the whole notion of revealing myself vulnerably to you, the assumption is that at some point you're going to see something and you're going to go. You're going to want to have nothing more, and I will be left with the me that I hate the most, and there will be no escaping it. And so like we live with a haunting ancient memory that does not want me to let myself be fooled into thinking that you would actually love me. And so revealing myself, so I think we've got good reason why it's so difficult for us to allow ourselves to be loved. We're not stupid. We don't do it because we don't resist it because we're cowards or because we're dumb. We do it because we have a memory of having been run over by a truck at some point in our own personal lives and in our ancient lives. And so, as a clinician, I mean, my goodness, how many times do we work with patients in which you're offering something that they have a hard time receiving, right? They come to you like it's their idea. Like, you made the appointment. That wasn't my idea. You made the appointment. You're paying me money, and I'm going to invite you to do this thing, and you won't do it. It's hard. It's hard for you to do it. And there's all kinds of, they want relief from their symptoms, but they want to be not sick. As we like to say, they would much rather be not sick than they would be well. They don't want to be well. And so as a clinician, and, it's like you're a clinician or you're a parent, right? You haven't tried that one on, right? As you're a parent and you've got children, and you have all this wisdom that you want to give to them. And when they don't receive it, then you want to kill them. And you would be justified. You know that you would be justified in wanting to, like, well, I'll find somebody else who will be willing to receive my wisdom. But there is this sense in which, like, whether it's with children or whether it's with patients, the one thing that we cannot control for, I can come with all the information about your depression, your anxiety, your eating disorder, your this, your that. I can all the information. I can give you as much of my presence as I want. But the one thing that I cannot, one of the number of things that I can't do is I cannot determine for you, the patient, determine for you, my child, where the threshold is such that once you cross it, you've suffered enough to make the changes you need to make. I can't control for that. I wish I could. You can have the same conversation with two different patients, and one patient will respond, another patient doesn't. And of course, the clinician is like thinking, like, well, what did I not do right? Like, there's something I didn't do right. One of the things that we see from Jesus over and over and over again is that he doesn't seem to be all that worked up or worried about, like, what he did or didn't do enough of to get people to follow him. The rich young ruler takes off, and Jesus is not chasing him. If it were me, like, oh no, wait, one more appointment. Well, we can have one more appointment. Yeah.
Responding to the heartfelt requests from you, our wonderful, wonderful listeners, for a deeper sense of community, we are so excited to introduce y'all to the But Jesus Drink Wine community.
Get ready to be part of an exclusive experience where you'll join a sisterhood of kindred spirits on a transformative journey of faith, sobriety, and personal growth.
You'll gain access to our private community, a place where deep connections can flourish among women who share your aspirations of strengthening faith in Christ and breaking free from alcohol.
But wait, there's more. We'll host regular connection calls to facilitate fellowship with like-minded gals, no matter where you stand on your alcohol or faith journey. Whether you're seasoned or just curious, you are very warmly welcomed here.
Prepare to be inspired by guest expert sessions and engaging Q&As that explore the essential topics for your sobriety, faith, and holistic wellness journey.
Don't miss out on securing your spot. Click the link in the show notes to learn more.
We can't wait to see your beautiful face in the But Jesus Drank Wine community.
I've heard you say that all anxiety is sourced from the degree to which we believe that we're alone in isolation. Can you expand on that a little bit? Because obviously anxiety is big for our world here.
Yeah.
Everybody's
Yeah.
right?
I mean, there's all kinds of research that you can read, all kinds of literature that you can read about what anxiety is from a neurophysiological standpoint, how we measure it, what it amounts to, so forth and so on. And like I said, we can have all kinds of insight about the mechanics of what it is and how it operates in the human experience. But that doesn't answer the question of where is its origin, ultimately. I say there is one haunting sentence in the first 2 pages of the Bible that at first glance, it doesn't look like it's anything but just a God describing the situation at hand and then taking action in response to it when he says, it's not good for the man to be alone. And it seems innocent enough of a comment until we get to the 3rd page of the Bible. And we see from the very beginning long before any fruit gets eaten, from the very beginning of the conversation that the snake is having with the woman, the snake is positioning himself to ensure that each of those humans is alone. He's only talking to the woman. Something's happening in that conversation that evokes something in the man, but the man chooses not to enter into it. Right? There's no sense in which the snake wants to say, hey, I know God's coming around about 5 o'clock. I'm just going to hang out here until he gets here and the four of us can talk. Right? He's not doing that. There is this isolation. And whether you're talking about, your 10th grade speech class offering, your first time, I'm anxious about that, or I'm anxious because I might lose my job, or we have cancer, or my marriage, the big things, small things, anxious. At the end of that road, I'm sensing that there's something, I'm going to be left with something that is going to be intolerable. I'm going to be left alone with this. I will not have performed well enough. I will not be enough to stop my husband and wife either from leaving, either through divorce or through their alcoholism or through their cancer. Like I'm not enough. So I'm going to be left with my grief and my shame, but I'm going to be left alone with it. And this makes me anxious, right? I'm not just afraid, well, I won't do well enough with my speech. It's the story I tell is that's not going to go well. And I'm going to be like left in a box under a bridge because this is story that I make up. And so as we say, like, yes, there are certain things for which anxiety, when we are anxious about certain things, we can resolve that through information or through acquisition, right? I'm anxious because I got to pick my wife up at the airport. By now I have a flat tire. But what do you know? AAA is actually able to come in 15 minutes. But that's not just information. That's not just about changing a tire. It's somebody coming to be with me. It's about withness. It's not just about solving a problem. Even when the surgeon steps to the table with a patient who is unconscious, the surgeon first has to be with the patient. And the patient has to be willing, even unconsciously, to be with the surgeon on the table. We're all anxious, but we're going to be with. And the moment that I choose to pay attention to the withness of someone being with me, and if they're willing to pay attention to the withness of me being with them, our anxiety recedes. This again lends to this question of the way in which confessional communities, in which the body of Jesus is intended to help reduce anxiety, especially in our world today, where it's just like off the charts. It's not about just coming up with a bigger solution. It is about being with. But of course, to be with means I'm going to come to you with the parts of me that I also am worried that you're actually going to see. And so it's tricky, right? But we see when Jesus talks about the parable of the sower, how is it that only a quarter of what he sows comes to harvest? Why is the gate and the path narrow? It's just because, well, it's hard to do all those things. Yeah. No, it's actually hard for me to allow you to love me. That's what makes it hard. That's what makes it narrow.
So true. There's so many people in all of your books, but in The Deepest Place as well, where I'm like, okay, yes, that speaks to what my story, my experience. And Cora was one in The Deepest Place where she's not that the details of her story are the same, but just the fact that she lived in her, intellect, and that success brain and like in that space of
Yeah.
climbing the corporate ladder and doing all of that as a way of not having to go there with where she had suffered and all of that.
Yeah.
That's something that I can so relate to. And I see it. I mean, our world makes it so easy for us to live in, the immediate gratification culture that we live in where everything is at our fingertips. We've got that information. And so, yeah, it's something that I'm very aware of how easy it is to fall into that habitual mode of being in our minds. I see how my kids with devices, I see all of that. And that creates that, kind of anxiety for me around how do we continue to, like we talk about in this work, like get into our bodies and be more embodied. And I know that's something that you talk about as well. In a practical sense, could you offer for our listeners, explain that better than I have just there, like how to get into our bodies and why we can, resort to just being in our minds as a nice distraction from,
Yeah, well, again, this all kind of goes back to we say there's very little about the human condition everything you need to know about human beings, you can know by reading the first 6 chapters of the Bible. Everything you need to know. And one of the first things that you see is that when God creates human beings, when we get the more kind of the blown up version of what's happening in the second page in the second chapter of Genesis, we see that God begins with mud. Mud and spirit combined are what makes human beings. We need them both, but there is a sequence. He doesn't just start with breath and throw mud up into it. He starts with mud. He forms mud, which tells us that we begin with our bodies. And paying attention to our bodies is not easy to do. We're very heady, very wordy, very abstract kind of operational creatures. To ask, one of the most common questions that we ask of patients when we say, "What are you feeling?" But it is with the follow-on question is, where do you sense it? Where in your body do you sense this? What's important about this is not just to identify, oh, I feel it in my chest or in my abdomen. It is to then say, oh, well, let's target this. And so for our listeners, we can say that one of the first things that's important about identifying your experience from a somatic standpoint, from a where is it happening in my body, is first of all, just for you to become aware of it, to notice where it is. And then once you're aware, you start to become more attuned to it when it does happen. So that we know, for instance, that if we focus on our breath, when I'm anxious, if I decide I'm going to take 3 deep breaths and pay attention to my breath while I'm taking them, we will find that our heart rate will reduce, our blood pressure will reduce, our felt sense of physical tension will reduce with 3 breaths, just with 3. 1, 2, 3. Now, some people might be so tense, they're like, well, I know 3, like I couldn't even get through my 3rd breath. Okay, I get that. But the point is not just to, breathe deeply 3 times when you're in trouble. The point is to develop practice, a breathing, we might even say a centering prayer practice, that if I were to commit even 5 to 10 minutes every day of doing something like this, it enables me not just to experience what that tranquility is like in my body and in my mind for those 10 minutes. With practice over the course of 6 weeks, what I begin to do is I notice the difference much more quickly when I'm more tense throughout the course of the day. And when that moment arrives, I pause and I take 2 deep breaths. And I'm actually able to bring that moment of tranquility into this moment, which transforms my state of mind so that I can be more curious instead of condemning about whatever it is that I'm in the middle of doing, talking with my colleague, doing a report, all the things that I'm having challenges with. That's just one thing. So we're practicing being attuned to our body. And then also with that, then taking action with our body. Another action that we take, like, look, the body, we especially with COVID, there were some parts of our society that were increasingly more sedentary. We just weren't moving as much. It's really important for the body to move. Movement of the body, for example, tells the mind that I have the capacity to do something. I have agency. Now, we don't think like, Kurt, what are you thinking about? Like, well, I will tell you, you don't think that getting up to get your cup of coffee from the counter, when you think, like, well, I don't, what's that got to do with agency? Well, I will tell you that you will be sure to know what agency is if when you want to get up, you have really horrible back pain and you can't get up. You will see very quickly why being able to stand up and walk across the room is such a huge deal to the human condition, but that we're not paying any attention to that because most of us aren't having that kind of a trouble. But when we are in our minds in distress, movement of any kind, going for a 5-minute walk 3 times a day, wherever you happen to be. I don't care where you are. Get up out of your chair, get out of your house. I don't feel like it's like North Face, right? There's no such thing as bad weather, just bad gear, right? You just got to go. You have to go. To move is to send the message that I have agency to do something that is not easy to do. And this is a countermand to shame, because what shame wants to say to you physiologically is you are incapable of movement. You are like you do all, we put words to this, but that's essentially, I'm incapable of movement. So those are just a couple of things I think that are, helpful things to do. I'll say a last thing I will say is this, and this is this, when you look around at our culture, people say, well, gosh, there's so much, violence and so much, right? Because we're so angry. And we are angry because we are hurt and because we have longings that have not been met. This is where anger comes from. And for some of us, we ask the questions in these confessional communities, like, how angry are you about this? I'm not like particularly angry. And then somebody pipes up, the other side of the room, like, well, I'm like pissed as all get out on your behalf. And you're like, I don't know why that is. And, we have an ottoman, an overstuffed ottoman that we keep in the center of the room with a tennis racket that sits on it. And we make it available at any given moment because we are working so hard to contain our rage. And in fact, for many of us, like if I were to ask our listeners, how many of you are carrying rage right now? You're like, that's kind of an odd question. Like, I'm not carrying rage. And I would say, I would put money on your having rage that you are so afraid of that you have buried it so deeply that you have no idea that it's present. But I will tell you that you are also burning a lot of energy, keeping it out of your conscious awareness. And that is energy that you do not have available, that God does not have available to create with you the beauty and goodness that he wants to create, that he's been planning for you from before the foundation of the world. And so another thing that we have people do is, like, when you are in touch with this, we want you to find a way to physically name this. Do you have a heavy bag? Do you have a tennis racket with a bunch of pillows? Do you, like, where are you and how are you going to physically express this in order for you to be aware that God's not afraid of your being mad. He certainly wasn't afraid of Jesus in the temple, and he's not afraid of us either. So those are three things.
Awesome. It's so good. Thank you. I want to kind of wrap it up with the durable hope piece of suffering, because if you could just more explicitly say, or give words to what do we mean by durable hope that's formed from suffering?
Yeah. As we've said in other places and times, suffering in and of itself is not a good thing. It's not God's idea of a good time. He doesn't want to, and so therefore, not people don't respond to suffering in ways that are always helpful. We can respond to our own suffering by doing other things that creates only greater suffering, which is what a lot of what's happening in our world. But if we are willing, in the context of a community, to be able, and again, this, in the book, we talk about how by the time Paul gets to suffering in this passage, he's already essentially named the necessity of secure attachment and this felt sense of, we're so glad that you're in the room, which is what glory is about in many respects. And so we come into this space of this suffering from the perspective of being deeply loved and wanted in the world, which is what enables us to practice, right? This is perseverance. And perseverance, with that practice, character becomes the outgrowth of what happens when we are practicing being loved in the middle of really, really difficult moments. That's what character becomes. And we talk about hope being a thing that is not independent of us. It is not a thing that, well, I hope that I can hope. I hope that hope just drops into my lap. Somehow it's going to magically appear. It is something that we actually form, especially when we take a look from a interpersonal neurobiological perspective about how the mind actually works when it comes to time travel. Right? Hope is a word that we use that describes our anticipated future. But my future is always something that I'm remembering. We like to say in our work that we remember our future. I anticipate a future based on what's happened in my past. And if my past has become something in which, even in the middle of my suffering, I am practicing allowing myself to be loved, which is not easy to do. It's especially when the pain isn't going away, especially when the cancer isn't getting better, especially when my 20-year-old child is still a drug addict. I mean, these are not things that go away. So I'm having to continually practice this. But what I'm doing is practicing building a neural network, a neural matrix of sensing God's presence in the presence of others who are going to be with me. And that's my experience, that's what I'm going to pay attention to. And that is what I'm going to remember. And this thing that I am remembering will necessarily be the launch pad from which I anticipate a future. That when I think about my future, I'm not going to think just about, a future hope means that my 20-year-old will become, they'll recover from their drug addiction. Hope is, even if they don't, I'm not going to be left alone. This is Trinitarian theology, and it's, foundationally. This is Jesus from the cross. We sometimes, mistheologize that opening verse of Matthew 25. My God, why? Because we forget that that's just one part of the 22nd Psalm that ends in victory and comfort and confidence. And so this hope becomes durable, not because we white knuckle it, not because I can make myself hope for this, but because I'm actually practicing something in the here and now that develops my mind in such a way whereby which when I anticipate my future, I'm anticipating it from a past in which I have been loved in the middle of really hard places, not in which there have been no hard places, but in some respects, the very opposite. And that's exactly what makes hope so durable. But it's hard work. It's really hard work. It's not a thing like, I'll just do this for like 6 weeks. And then it's like, I take a 6-week course in hope durability.
Yes.
And then I'll have it. And then I'll get my degree. And then I won't ever have to go back to school again. No, it doesn't work. And because this is the world that we actually live in. And the reason it is so hard to do is because the world, as it turns out, is actually so beautiful. A world that were any less beautiful, it wouldn't be nearly as difficult to live in. Because we would essentially kind of be reduced to squirrels and alligators, and we wouldn't be humans. It would be something much less than that. God wants, this is the thing. When Paul, that beautiful prayer, at the end of Ephesians 3, where he's just like, I hope that the love of God can, the love that can help you imagine things that you can't imagine. Well, I kind of think that's tough if I can't imagine, because there is this, that it's hard for us to imagine because of our brokenness. It's hard for us to imagine who we are destined to be, that we are destined to be these incredibly solid, beautiful creatures that are going to be able to tolerate the heaven that's coming. As Dallas Willard once said in his Missouri drawl, God will let anyone into his heaven who can take it. And
Thank you for helping give me the imagination for what it means to do the hard work of following Jesus and receiving his love and being able to offer that to other people. I appreciate you.
No. I'm just taking your words in. Very kind. And I love doing this together, this conversation. I realize I've been doing most of the talking. I don't mean to be saying I love talking a lot.
What a blessing it's been. I know will be for our listeners. For me, we just recorded with your buddy Tony Collier the other day.
Oh yes.
And so so we got up with her, and I was like, this was church. We laughed and we cried, and it was church, and this is what this has felt like. And I'm so grateful for your time and for your you, Curt. Thank you.
Oh, again, you're very welcome. And I'm just, your words are a real gift. And we have this phrase: we ingest, we digest, and we metabolize. And, you ingest in a few seconds, you digest over minutes to hours, and you metabolize for the rest of your life. And I'm just taking in your words. been really lovely, and I'm really grateful to have been together.
Will you let everyone know where they can find you? I will also say that in the
Will
I'll
I
put that
let?
in the
Will I?
intro
Will I?
note.
Oh.
Yeah,
Let
sorry.
me say,
Yeah,
like, I'm just thinking, like,
address, please.
well, I'm
I know.
here. I'm here in my here in Northern Virginia,
I
and
was
right
waiting.
here,
I was waiting
right,
for
right.
Chrissy
Right.
to end the recording, and then I'm like, oh wait, I forgot the part where
It's
we would
okay.
love to direct people to where they could find your work. Of
Hmm,
course, we'll have it linked in the show note. But
sure. Yes, you can find my work in a number of ways. Probably the most common way that people are encountering my work is through our podcast right now, through the Being Known podcast, where Pepper Sweeney and I, my co-host, and Amy Cella, our co-producer, spend time kind of exploring this question of what does it mean for us to be deeply known, and this intersection of neuroscience and spiritual formation. We love doing that. So that's one way. You can find me at CurtThompsonMD.com, and you can follow me on Instagram, Twitter, X, and Facebook, whatever those things are. And then also we have this small nonprofit called the Center for Being Known, which you are very familiar with. We are doing a lot of work there that is just emerging in ways that I mean, it's clearly the work of the Spirit, because I that horse is out of the barn door and running, and I feel like I'm just standing at the door watching it go. So those are some ways, and our practice is newstorybehavioralhealth.com here in Northern Virginia. We've just completed this past week. We completed a 2.5-day in-person intensive training with confessional communities. So that's another way to get access to some of the work. So that in the books, yeah.
Ron's heard me talk a lot about the podcast, season 4, season 5, season 8 in particular have been just tremendous. The CBK and the work that you're doing there, and I'm just so grateful to be able to kind of watch and be a part of it. And with the confessional communities, it's all just amazing. Thank you so much
You're welcome.
for all of it. And
Yeah, you're welcome.
thank you so much. See y'all next time.
Very good. Till next time. Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us again this week. You can find all of our episodes at butjesusdrinkwine.com, and be sure to follow us over on Instagram, Love Life Sober, and I'm Not Sober, I'm Free.
To learn more about what we do, you can visit our websites, meadhollandshirley.com and lovelifesober.com.
Take a screenshot of this podcast and share it with a friend or two.
And don't forget to subscribe to our pod so you don't have to worry about missing a single episode. And if you love what we're doing, please leave us a review on Apple and Spotify.
This helps more women who are feeling stuck and alone in the overdrinking cycle find hope and encouragement.
Thanks, ladies. We so appreciate you, and we'll see you next Monday.